for doing this again.
Of course. No, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on this work. Let me find the appropriate page. Okay. If I go slideshow, can you see that?
We can see that, yeah. We can see the slides.
You can?
Yeah.
Okay. Super. Alrighty. So what am I going to do today? I'm going to go through one recent paper. This is under review at the moment, but we are still very keen to get your comments on it. Sorry. The paper is using a new technique in using word embeddings essentially for social scientific research, developed by Pedro Rodriguez and Arthur Sperling, as well as Brandon Stewart, and I've contributed a function or two to this package as well. It's called Context. So I'm gonna run through this. Depending on how time goes, I may also quickly walk through a worksheet that I sent Akin. I don't know if he's shared it yet with you.
I did.
If
you
not,
all have the materials in your
right,
email.
okay, super. If not, like the worksheet is kind of designed for you to be able to go through on your own, but we'll see how we get on with time. Okay, the research question for this paper is pretty straightforward. It's quite methods focused, and it asks a question that is centrally relevant to research on communication, political communication, sort of media freedom, particularly within authoritarian systems. And so will it be of interest to, hopefully, to people who are interested in those topics. But I do see a wider use for this within non-academic kind of monitoring circles when for industries interested in the state of media freedom within different national contexts. The question we're asking is whether we can measure media freedom using raw text alone, and this text comes from news media outlets of different types, and I'll walk you through those shortly. Why is it important? I won't spend too much time on this. I hope you're all convinced of the importance of freedom for proper functioning of democratic governance. We've observed in various contexts that the capture of media by state institutions can be used as an arm of coercion, particularly when national polities are sliding toward more authoritarian forms of governance. This can happen slowly, it can also happen very quickly. We know that it also makes sense for authoritarian governments to try to take over institutions of the so-called fourth estate, because we know that their control over media outlets has consequences which are incredibly causally identified on attitudes, as well as the possibility of opposition, right? The possibility of individuals to coordinate in opposition in opposition to governments based on a kind of collective understanding of their wrongdoing and the criticism that can be directed or levied against them. It's also, finally, a key component of various indices that we use within political science, in particular of democratic governance, right? That is to say that we don't just measure whether or not free and fair elections happen in things like Freedom House or VDEM or whatever. We also measure whether the media is itself an institution that can function without fear of sanction and without interference. And a key component, the third thing I want to say, a key component of media criticism, of media freedom, is the ability, right, of institutions of the fourth estate to criticize governments. And that's what I'm going to get onto when it comes to our measurement strategy and our methodological strategy in this paper. Okay, So how do people go about doing this at the moment? That is measuring media freedom. Well, we have a bunch of work. Actually, a lot of it in a Middle Eastern context, as well as in Turkey, um, in particular, that looks at how media outlets might succumb to interference and influence from the outside. And these are really kind of granular, in-depth, detailed studies of how individuals might be replaced or succumb to pressure from external influences and pressures. What these don't give us, of course, they do give us mechanisms. What they don't give us is over time trends and changes in media freedom overall. And what we tend to use to measure that is over time trends in media freedom, are these things that are either expert surveys or they're like composite indices based on the judgment of various kind of third sector organizations like Freedom House. But VDEM is the one I want to call your attention to here, because this is based on a kind of composite scaled measure of expert survey respondents about media freedom within different national contexts. This is what these data look like for Egypt. So there may be people on this in this meeting who have actually responded to these surveys themselves. I have a number of countries, and what these surveys ask essentially is and I think they kind of randomize the years to different respondents, so you don't have to answer too many questions. But they say, like, in 1961 in Egypt, how free do you think the print and broadcast media were to criticize the government? Right? And then you have like a rating, like on a scale of 0 to 4. You give a response, and then they also ask you, how confident are you of this response? And you can say, like, to be honest, I don't really have a clue, but I gave it a go, or I'm extremely confident of that. And that is kind of built into the composite measurement as well. And what these things do, what these composite measures do, is allow us to get some sense, in the absence of prior survey data, whatever, of over time trends over the kind of longer durée of what print and broadcast media look like, and how free they were within a particular national context over time. So we see here, like, obvious downturn in the ability of the media to criticize after Nasser came to power in the 1950s, and then it kind of gradually increases with the liberalization of institutions of news media under Hosni Mubarak, but still, they were essentially captured institutions, though increasingly free. And then with the Arab Spring protests in 2011 and a kind of short-lived movement toward open, free and fair elections and democratic governance, we see a big uptick in the ability of print and broadcast media to criticize governments before a coup in 2013, which brings this crashing back down. Okay, so that's kind of the state of play. There are other places other than VDEM that do something not dissimilar. This is the Freedom House estimates for press freedom over time, and this is disaggregated by polities that are partly free, not free, and free. And with these measurements that are kind of based on in-house institutional estimates of the state of media freedom. You have these annual freedom reports, part of which will be media freedom, and we see that we can kind of get an estimate of over time trends and changes in these. Now, what is important to emphasize here is that it's not just VDEM that focus on media criticism as being central to how we understand media freedom. It's also things like Freedom House, Reporters Without Borders, and so on. They focus on the ability of news media to criticize, and that's helpful for us, as I'll show you in a few slides' time, when we're trying to come up with a way to measure this a key component of media freedom that is criticism, when we're trying to measure that from raw text data alone. Okay, so what we focus on in this paper are two countries. Egypt from 2008 to 2020, Tunisia from 2008 to 2022. Slightly longer in Tunisia because of recent events in Tunisia and the kind of slide toward or back toward or away from democratic governance there. We wanted to extend the data collection a bit further in time. Okay, but what happened during this time? Well, the key events were the following. Right? In Tunisia and in Egypt, we see the overthrow of dictators of many decades, in some cases 2 decades in another. And we see in the aftermath of these events, with the January 25th revolution in Egypt, that there's a period of kind of press liberalization. Suddenly, not only are legacy newspapers able to criticize more freely the government and to report more freely on goings on within Egyptian society, we also get this flourishing of new independent media in Egypt. And I would know because I have manually coded a lot of the newspapers myself when building protest event data sets and so on. These newspapers were very freely reporting during this period of time, 2011, 2013, on the goings on within Egypt, and were very able to criticize the government as well. What we then see in 2013, after the coup led by SICSS and the atrocious events that took place in June of that year, with the killing of many hundreds of Muslim brothers, is a kind of period of media recapture. And we see articles like this, like extolling the virtues of Assisi, and and this is the front page of one of the main newspaper of record in Egypt, Al Ahram. Okay. In Tunisia, we see something not dissimilar. Right? We see revolution, the overthrow of Ben Ali in 2011. We see then a period of liberalization and democratization that stretches a lot further than in Egypt, all the way up to 2020, further on, depending on how you judge Qais Said's ascendancy. But we see again the ability of newspapers newly to be able to criticize governments. There is an ongoing kind of threat of democratic reversion, but I wouldn't say there's been complete media recapture yet, though the threats to that are becoming more severe and more credible. So Tunisia differs in some sense in that, while there have been threats to the continued ability of institutions of state in Tunisia to govern democratically, we haven't seen a complete reversion in the same way that we have in Egypt. Okay, so those are like our two cases. And these are the VDEM scores for media freedom, or the ability of media to criticize, right, over this time period. So we see, again, in Egypt, we see this big downturn in 2013 that continues to decrease. In Tunisia, we see an uptick in 2011 after the revolution. Higher numbers indicate an increased ability of news media to criticize, right? So we see it kind of tops out at around 3 or just below, i.e., news media are free in this context, or nearly completely free in this context, according to VDEM. So this is our kind of reference, if you like. We could refer to it as a gold standard. We don't have to, because some people don't like VDEM, in which case that's fine. But this is kind of our reference data, if you like. Like, we're asking whether we can recover something that looks like this, because we believe VDEM credibly estimates what the status of media freedom is within these contexts. Okay, so what do we do? Well, I managed to get my hands on this enormous data set of Arabic language news media. The data are created and collected by one of my co-authors on this paper, Mus'ab al-Dori. Mus'ab was a master's student in computer science when he started a website called magres.com, which was a news aggregation platform for Moroccan newspapers. And it used machine learning classification to take the text, classify whether it was like political text or it was about football or it was about the economy or whatever. He filtered into those categories, tagged them, and essentially just ingested on a daily basis news media data from Moroccan news media every single day. And this was his master's project. He then got kind of carried away with this and decided to like 6 other countries in the Middle East, in North Africa, including Tunisia and Egypt. And these are the websites masres.com and tourist.com. On these, we have over 100 different newspapers, mainly in Egypt, a lot using many millions, tens of millions of news articles from both of these countries over a 10 or 12-year period, and 12 years if we're talking about Tunisia. I'm just getting a notice that my internet is unstable, so do shout if I start breaking up.
You're coming in and out a little bit, but it's okay.
Okay. Okay, so this is what the raw news data look like. This is one JSON file from the Ahram News, the big newspaper in Egypt. You can see that just for this one newspaper, we have like 2 gigabytes of JSON data. So this was like quite a big data engineering task in and of itself. And I'll talk you through what we did to kind of discipline, if you like, these many gigabytes of text data that we had. Okay, the first thing we needed to do was to decide which terms in Arabic identified the political executive. Why are we thinking about the political executive? Well, there's quite a lot of literature in both communications and political science work that will say, look, authoritarian polities don't look like a kind of Orwellian total capture of the media environment where everything is upside down, right? We do allow some criticism of the government, but where the red line is around the political executive, i.e. you can't directly criticize the figure of the president. And so essentially we want to identify this body of individuals, of the president and the individuals directly surrounding the president within the political executive. And so for Egypt, we choose these words, and these are actually based on, these are the Arabic versions of the words used in VDEM itself to identify the political executive. Only a few of these are relevant to the Tunisian context, where a lot of the institutional names, institutions of the political executive change name over the course of this 10-year period. So we chose a fewer number, but I mean, essentially the word president is doing most of the work here for us. Okay, so we take these terms, and then what do? Well, we use this embedding regression approach. I need to update this reference to 2023 because this just came out in the journal American Political Science Review, but this was a working paper at the time. It's called a la carte embedding, and I'll talk you through exactly what that is in just a moment. What we decide to do is we take are words that denote the political executive, and using basic similarity measurements like cosine similarity, what we do is we project our words that denote the political executive onto a vector of opposition minus support. What that is essentially is proxying for some kind of criticism index. So the closer words denoting the executive are to words for opposition or words for support, we understand as a kind of proxy for how critical this body of news text is of the political executive. That's probably unclear at the moment. Don't fear, there's a few more slides where I kind of break this down and break the different parts down of how we're doing this. So this gives us a kind of over time measure of change in how critical the language is. It's candidate as a whole. These are the terms embeddings. It's a candidate. Okay, I'm going to talk you through, Ali, exactly how this works in just a second, but that's a good question. Okay, how does this work? Right, so this is the full analytical pipeline, and I'm going to break down the last layer of this in the next slide. So what do? We don't use all of the news data because there's no need to do that. There's like limited payoff once you get past a certain threshold. So we take 10% of all of our news text data. We pre-process by removing punctuation, non-Arabic letters, numbers, white space, like the kind of normal stuff. We then train a word embedding layer with the glove algorithm. What is this doing? Okay, this is the crucial step because this provides us with a kind of reference embedding layer, which we're then going to use to induce period-specific embeddings with our words around the political executive. So we get this embedding layer. What is this? Basically, it's a series of vectors that denote the position of a word in overall semantic space. So the word, the traditional version that is used is that the word cat is going to appear close in vector space to the word dog, for example. Why? Because these words often appear near each other within actual observed language use. Right? In this context, we would imagine that the words government, minister, ministers, president, executive here, this is what all these Arabic terms mean, will also appear next to each other. And all of these are like a series of numbers, right, in vector format of length or dimension 300. And each one of these represents how this word is used in the observed use of the Arabic language within our news corpus. And we train two of these, one of them for Egypt and one of them for Tunisia. Okay, so that's the first step. Then what we do is we take we again take a sample of 10%, the 10% sample of our newspapers. We filter by category, so we only want the political news. We're not really interested in sports or anything like that, so we take the political news. Right? We then use named entity recognition to detect named bylines. Why do we do that? Because we made an assumption that those articles with named bylines, individual writers, authors of these articles, they're more likely to express an opinion than is like, basic chronicling, editorial chronicling of like what happened during that day here and there. So we want kind of articles that might express an opinion on things. Then again, we pre-process it. And we end up with news articles that look like this, and many millions of news articles we then use to induce to then derive our proxy for media criticism. Okay, so we've got this like reference embedding layer that's crucial. I'm going to tell you why it's crucial in just a second. And then we have some raw news text, and each of these is labeled by date, right? What do we do next? Well, we divide the entire news corpus. We're now on the bottom layer. We divide the entire news corpus into year-week chunks. Right? We then go back to our reference embedding layer. We take the word for opposition and we subtract it from the word for support. This is our index of criticism. Yeah. Now, this is the smart bit, and this is where a la carte embedding comes in. What we do is we don't take the words necessarily denoting the executive. What we do is for each year week, we take all of the words around that political executive word. So that might be president or it might be minister or whatever. And we look up the embedding, the vector for that word within our reference embedding. And we take the average of all of those words around our target word. Why do we do that? Well, this is based on a core assumption within linguistics, which is the distributional assumption of semantic meaning. And this assumption goes that we shall know the meaning of a word by the company it keeps. So this means what we can do is for every single year week, we can take an average of the words around, let's say, the word for president, and we find its position in vector space, right? By projecting that averaged vector onto the vector, the kind of index of criticism that we have, which is a vector, which is the opposition minus support vector. What that does is it induces like a period specific embedding for the political executive at that point in time. So let's say the word president in 2011 is surrounded by words like blame, protest, dislike, etc., etc., etc. We average all of those words, right? We find its position within our reference embedding layer. We project it onto our opposition or our criticism index. And we would expect that it's closer to the opposition end of that pole, right, than it is to the support end of that pole or index, whatever you want to call it. Okay, the next slide kind of breaks down that step into every single bit that I've just described. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're going from January 2008 to December, or to January 2020, essentially. And we can see here, for those of you who speak any Arabic, this is the word for president. And then we take surrounding words, right? We take the vectors of each of those, we average them, and then what we're doing is we're projecting onto this index of opposition. Okay? And through that whole process, we are inducing a period-specific embedding for the political executive. And what that embedding is showing us when we project it onto our opposition support vector is how critical the news media was essentially that week and that year of the political executive. Got it. Super. Ali understands. Hope that's the case for us. Okay, results. How are we doing for time? Good. Well, happily, I probably wouldn't be presenting this to you, would I, if it weren't happily. We see a pretty close correlation between our raw text-based measures using a la carte embedding and the measures for VDEM. So VDEM is in the kind of lighter gray here with no border, and then our text-based measure is with the black border. So it's kind of it's a little bit closer for Egypt, whereas it's less so for Tunisia, but the correlation is still close, and we're arguing essentially that we recover some measure of reality when it comes to actual observed media criticism through raw text alone. The other thing to emphasize is that this once you've trained the reference embedding layer, right, this is an extremely quick process, so it's very scalable. To estimate this, to like measure the cosine similarities for each year week for the entire observation period, it's like 40 seconds or something. It takes no time at all. And so we're not talking about like retraining an embedding layer or retraining a classifier kind of every step. This is, once you have the reference embedding layer, it's pretty quick. Okay, we then do a series of further validations, if you like, of what we're doing here. Firstly, we get some human coders in Egypt, 7 of them at a research institute in Egypt, to label themselves how critical they think a piece of news media is of the political executive. And we give them like a random sample of 1,000 articles each to code. In total, we have like 7,000 or 8,000, I think, labeled news articles. We use these to then train a transformer-based model using ArabBERT in this case to then classify a bunch of validation or test data and to see if we can recover the same kind of overtime trends. We also use GPT-4 to do the same in like a zero-shot context, prompting by saying, you're a research assistant that needs to classify news media scalar on like the same scale, and we ask it to do essentially the same thing that we asked our human beings to do. And then there's a couple of additional analyses we do that might help in providing an actual metric, if you like, of whether there has been a worrying change in observed media criticism. And we feel like that is particularly useful for third sector observatory kind of contexts who are monitoring these trends, and I'll talk about those as well. These are the cut point analyses and different diff. So the cut point analysis comes first, and here essentially we're estimating when in the observed overall trends for each country, when is the highest probability that we've seen a significant change in the outcome variable of interest, right? So Egypt, this comes in on the year week beginning 15th of July. Funnily enough, that's when I'm getting married, I've just realized. And that is like the period right after the coup, right? So that conforms with expectations. In Tunisia, that change is the period just before Ben Ali is pushed out and flees Tunisia. So the week beginning the 10th, I think he fled on the 14th. So this again conforms to expectations, right? We can use these cut point analysis or change point analyses in order to detect notable changes in the outcome of interest. And this is particularly useful for monitoring purposes, we argue. These are the estimates from our human labelers. So we've just averaged across the scores. A lot of them we've averaged across the scores and the scores that they give these individual news articles over time. And we can see that we recover, this is for Egypt only, we recover a pretty similar trend in downturn of media criticism. These are our transformer-based estimates, again for Egypt here on the left using Arabert, and this is with GPT-4. Here for Tunisia with Arabert, and here with GPT-4. Again, we seem to see something not dissimilar. These need to be kind of refined and improved, but they were our first go at them. And then the final thing that we can do, if you're a causal identification person, is we can then give a precise estimate or have a go at anyway at inferring some kind of estimate of what the effect of a particular event is on media criticism. Here we're interested in the effect of the coup in Egypt on media criticism. The question we're asking ourselves is, okay, if the coup hadn't happened, right, counterfactually, what would we expect the level of media criticism to be? Now, what do we use as our kind of synthetic control in this case? Well, we use Tunisia, right? Because Tunisia saw a transition over this time. We see not dissimilar levels of media freedom during this time, but it didn't see a coup in 2013. And so we can use that, in essence, as a kind of synthetic control. And here we're using a synthetic difference and differences approach in order to estimate the actual effect of this event by a single point in time. Here we've chosen 300 weeks since the start of the transition. So in summary, what do we get from this technique? And what do we observe? Well, we see expectedly large decreases and increases in media criticism that we can credibly assign to political events in time. But what the methodological contribution is, and this is the main contribution, is that we can estimate, if we have the raw text data, a really important component of media freedom, democratic governance, which is the ability of the media to criticize a political executive without having to spend loads of money on surveys, without having to rely on experts. And we can also do it in a way that is responsive, right? We can have an estimate the next day and not the next year, as it is often the case with Freedom House and others. That is me. I really look forward to your questions. Thank you very much for listening.
That was amazing. Where is my clap emoji? This was very good. Thank you so much, Christopher. This was fascinating. And in Turkish media ecosystem as well, I mean, thinking the largest attributable decline in Turkish media freedom, it was, I think, post 2015 when Russia enters Syria, and then the whole security environment for Turkey changes, and then gradually you start seeing war cabinets in governments with like authoritarianism. And you can, thinking about it, I never thought about it, but you can really look at newspapers and just like in general, both printed media, TV media, radio media, and digital media, that we start to observe, I think, a lot of extreme similarities, even like in the case of almost in very critical like crisis periods, almost the same headlines in most newspapers. It's as if the whole diversity of language is gone, right? So your paper really like inspired a lot of new research ideas for me. I mean, Turkey as well is a very good case of short-term increases and decreases in decreases in the level of democracy, and you can really identify that by looking at media text. This is fascinating. So I'm pretty sure we have people who are working in a similar topic in this crowd. So I would just open up the floor for questions, technical questions, topical questions, theoretical questions. Let me just open up the floor to those who might, because I know Ali is working on a similar kind of topic, so he already asked the question, but I'll just give the floor to people. Yes, Ali, please.
Thank you for the presentation. It was so cool. I just wanted to ask a question about text data. You mentioned that you were finding the kind of the, I mean, how to say, the surrounding embeddings for those selected words you had, for example, like a wazir as a president. And I just wanted to know that, so let's say we have a text, I mean, a preprocessed text, and you want to right now apply the same method on it. And are you considering all of the tokens you have in the text data to calculate the similarity of the embedding with respect to each of those selected or reference words?
So I think I get what you're getting at. So you're talking about the reference embedding that we're estimating. Are we using all of the tokens for that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good question. So the answer is yes. And there's a reason why we do that. Some of you might think, well, why are you interested in words like the and blah, 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 which is a reasonable question. The reason we don't bother with removing those is that within this ALC approach that I described, and something I left out of this presentation, is that we also use a transformation matrix. And essentially what that transformation matrix does is it downweights words that don't give us much signal, right? So we're not that interested in words like and but and blah, blah, blah. So we can just use that, and you can kind of fiddle with the temperature of that to, not the temperature, I'm using GPT jargon now. You know what I mean? The kind of fiddle with how much we want to downweight these kind of not particularly useful words as a last stage in generating that embedding layer. Yeah, that is what is suggested by Arthur Sperling and Pedro Rodriguez in their paper. So I urge you to read that. It's a really lovely approach, and that's essentially how you deal with it.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions we have? So ideally, normally, we are going to have intermediate and advanced NLP and word embeddings tutorials and trainings on Tuesday, I think. So normally I was planning this talk right after those two NLP tutorials. So in that case, there would be far more questions than this. But we're recording this so that people are going to rewatch after learning some of the techniques and tools, not as advanced as you're using here, but maybe like have more hands-on experience with the actual mechanics of what you're doing here. I'm pretty sure there will be much more questions on Tuesday. Can they send you an email with questions? I know I'm opening up the
Yeah, I was just about to offer. Yeah, I was just about to offer. In fact, I recognize that. Yeah, I've come at you with probably some of the most advanced and difficult. I'm not banging my own drum here. I'm banging the drum of others Sterling. Some of the most advanced and difficult methods when using word embeddings for the social sciences. So it might all appear a bit baffling at this stage. I completely get that, as will the worksheet. But in essence, and I hope I break this down helpfully in the worksheet, what we're doing here is essentially estimating a whole bunch of probabilities for words appearing close to each other. And it's really no more and no less than that. Once we kind of dispel the jargon and do away with all of that, and I break that down with sort of two approaches. The glove approach, but a first approach is just kind of estimating by hand, if you like, a whole bunch of probabilities so that we can find words that are kind of near each other using a singular value decomposition. So that should be helpful to you after you've done the kind of more introductory text analysis methods. And by all means, shoot me an email and I can help out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you will be getting a lot of questions after Tuesday, but thank you so much, Christopher. Let me virtually clap as well. Thank you so much. This has been really amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this. And
you are very lucky to have Akin giving you this summer school. I wish I could have had the chance to leave this.
You're being too kind. You're being too kind. Well, if for by any chance you guys want to come to Istanbul for honeymoon or just like do sightseeing, let me know.
We're practically watching. If we come to Istanbul, I will be letting you know. Thank you, everyone.
Cool. Thank you. See you. Bye. Take care.
Thanks. Speak soon. Bye-bye.